My name is Clara Evans and I died on my 80th birthday. The sharp pain in my chest was nothing compared to the jagged shard of humiliation lodged in my throat as I watched them all. My husband, my grown children, my grandchildren, gather around her table. The laughter from next door where Eleanor Vance was celebrating her 65th, floated through my open window and wrapped around my neck like a noose. They'd forgotten me. Completely. The ornate cake I'd baked myself sat untouched in my silent kitchen. For 80 years I had practiced yielding. It was the only lesson my husband, Richard Evans, had ever truly taught me. When his younger brother died young, leaving Eleanor a widow with 2 toddlers, Richard's refrain began, "Be understanding, Clara. We owe them. We have to help." And so I yielded. I yielded when he took the promotion that required relocation and suggested Eleanor, who was so fragile, go with him to manage his household and help with paperwork, while I stayed behind to care for our 2 young children and his aging parents. I yielded when the money orders and ration coupons grew thin, then stopped altogether, because he said it was easier to give everything to Eleanor to manage for both families. I yielded when my children, Daniel and Maya, grew up in patched clothes while Eleanor's son and daughter wore new wool coats, when they buried their dreams of university in the rocky soil of our farm while Eleanor's children walked into secure government posts. I yielded until my back was bent and my spirit was dust. And for what? My final act was not one of grace. A lifetime of compressed rage, a geyser of it, finally erupted. I stumbled to the doorway between our homes, my breath ragged. I saw my son, Daniel, lifting a glass to toast Eleanor's health. I saw Richard, my husband of 55 years, looking at her with a fondness I couldn't remember ever seeing directed at me. "To family," someone said. The words were a spark to the tinder of my soul. Family. My voice, unused to shouting, scraped raw through the festive noise. All heads turned. The smiles froze, then melted into varying shades of pity and annoyance. "Mother, please," Maya whispered, rushing toward me, her face tight with embarrassment, not concern. I didn't speak to her. My eyes were locked on Richard. "My birthday," I said, the words a low, broken thing. "You forgot my birthday." For a moment he looked genuinely confused, as if trying to recall a distant, unimportant fact. Then a flicker of impatience. "Clara, don't make a scene. We'll celebrate tomorrow. Eleanor needed us today. You know how hard today is for her. She needed you." The unspoken, eternal truth of my life. Eleanor stood, a hand fluttering to her chest, the picture of distressed gentility. "Oh, Claire darling. My deepest apologies. With all the arrangements it simply slipped my mind. We'll have a lovely tea tomorrow, just us girls." The condescension in her voice, the performance of remorse, was the final blow. The world narrowed to a tunnel of red. I lunged forward, not at her, but at the long banquet table laden with food my husband's money had bought. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I grabbed the edge and heaved. The crash of porcelain, the splatter of wine and gravy, the screams. It was a symphony of destruction. And in its center I stood chest heaving. Then the real pain came. Not in my heart but in my soul, tearing out through my ribs. It was sharp, absolute and final. I collapsed onto the wreckage of the feast, the sticky sweetness of frosting on my cheek. My last sight was not of my children rushing to me. It was of them huddling around Eleanor, shielding her from the upset, Richard patting her shoulder while his eyes scanned my still form with something like weary frustration. If I could live again. The thought was a dying ember. I would yield nothing. I would let you have him. I would take everything for myself. Darkness. And then light. Not a heavenly light, but the pale, dusty sun of a late autumn morning filtering through the familiar faded curtains of my bedroom. I bolted upright, my hands flying to my chest. No pain. Only the frantic drum of a healthy, young heart. I stumbled to the dresser mirror. A woman in her early 30s stared back, her face unlined by decades of bitterness, her brown hair still thick, though tied in a simple, weary knot. It was me. Clara Evans. But the Clara from 47 years ago. On the dresser lay a single envelope, its arrival yesterday a pivotal memory from another lifetime. A registered letter. My hands began to shake. "Mama? I'm hungry." I turned. In the doorway stood a tiny girl no taller than a kitchen stool, her dress too short, her eyes too big. My 4-year-old daughter, alive and small and hungry. The wave of emotion that hit me nearly brought me to my knees. Grief, love, fury, and a desperate, clawing protectiveness. In my last life I had failed her. I had let her become diminished, resentful, a shadow pleading for scraps from Eleanor's table. "Just a moment, my love," I heard myself say, my voice strangely calm. I walked into the small kitchen, my movements automatic. The pantry was nearly bare. I knew where the last of the eggs were. I knew Richard had sent this month's meat ration coupons to Eleanor's house next door a week ago, saying her boys needed the protein for their growth. Last time I had steamed one egg for Maya and told her to share it with her brother, Daniel, who was staying with his grandparents. I had eaten dry bread and called it sustenance. Not this time. I took out all 8 eggs from the cool box. I steamed them until the whites were firm and the yolks creamy gold. I set them on a plate before Maya at the table. Her eyes grew even wider. "All for me. For now," I said, my voice soft. "Eat, darling. Eat until you're full." While she ate, spooning the tender egg into her mouth with a solemn, rapturous focus, I retreated to my room. I picked up the registered letter. The handwriting of my old professor, Dr. Alastair Finch, was as precise as I remembered. "Dear Miss Clark," he used my maiden name, a deliberate and respectful choice. "Following our correspondence, I am pleased to formally invite you to join the Western Frontier Development and Education Corps. Your linguistic skills and resilience, noted during your university years, are precisely the qualities we seek. Departure is scheduled for 3 weeks' time." 3 weeks. In my first life, this letter had been my secret hope, a fragile dream of purpose beyond the 4 walls of this house and Richard's overwhelming misplaced sense of duty. And then 10 days after receiving it, Richard had come home. His visit wasn't a homecoming, it was a deployment. He told me Eleanor was struggling, that the anniversary of his brother's death was too much for her. He had secured a position for her as his administrative aide at his new post. "It's the only way, Clara. You're strong. You can hold things here. He needs this. For the children." And I, believing that being strong meant being silent, that love meant endless sacrifice, had folded the letter away and buried my dream. I had yielded. My fingers traced the embossed letterhead. A wild, reckless hope, terrifying in its intensity, blossomed in my chest. The thought was clear, cold, and solid. Not this time. I would not be here when Richard arrived. I would not hear his rehearsed speech about debt and duty. I would not let him look at my daughter's thin arms and tell me to be more understanding. I opened my small, battered trunk. I began to pack, my movements swift and sure. Practical clothes, my few books, our identification papers, the small pouch of savings I'd scraped together from taking in sewing. I would take Maya with me. As for Daniel, a pang struck me. He was with Richard's parents, doted upon. For now he was fed and safe. The hard truth, learned over a bitter lifetime, was that he had always been closer to them and later fatally enamored with the comfort of Eleanor's world. I could not save a son who did not wish to be saved from the gilded cage. But I would not let my daughter starve within its shadow. The decision was made. I would go west with Dr. Finch's corps. And I would leave Richard Evans to the life he so clearly preferred, one with Eleanor Vance at its center. But before I left, there were debts to collect. The smell of frying bacon hit me the moment I stepped into Eleanor Vance's yard. It was a rich, salty, impossible-to-ignore scent that spoke of a pantry my kitchen could only dream of. I held Maya tighter on my hip, her small arms looped around my neck. Through the open window, I could see the evidence of my husband's generosity. Eleanor's 2 boys, Henry and Thomas, were at the table, plates heaped with food. Eleanor herself, clad in a smart new dress of synthetic blue fabric, moved between stove and table with the serene grace of a woman who had never worried about her next meal. A cold clarity settled over me. In my first life, I had averted my eyes from this scene, twisting my own hunger into a perverse virtue, proof of my sacrifice, my understanding. Now I let the fury fuel me. It was a clean, sharp fuel, not the smoldering resentment that had poisoned me before. I didn't knock. I walked to the end of the alley where she stood, holding court with a trio of neighboring women, Mrs. Gable, Mrs. Pierce, and old Miss Talbot. They were admiring her dress clip, a shiny black bow that caught the morning sun. "Just a little something from the city," Eleanor was saying, her voice a melodic hum of false modesty. "A kindness, really." She saw me. The practiced smile on her face faltered for a fraction of a second before widening, becoming a mask of concern. Clara. You're out early. And with little Maya. Is everything all right? The other women turned to me, their expressions politely curious. I said nothing at first. I just looked at her, really looked. I saw the confident tilt of her chin, the softness of hands that hadn't scrubbed laundry on a board for years, the calculated warmth in her eyes that never reached below the surface. I saw the woman for whom my life had been hollowed out. Clara. Mrs. Gable asked, her brow furrowing. You look peaky. Everything all right at home? I shifted Maya's weight and finally spoke, my voice low and deliberate, aimed solely at Eleanor. Richard sent the food and meat coupons again, didn't he? The color drained from Eleanor's face, leaving 2 spots of rouge standing out like wounds. A plate clattered inside her house. Clara, what a thing to say. I don't. My daughter hasn't had meat in 2 months, I continued, my voice cutting through her stammer. I addressed the women now, turning their curiosity into witness. I can count every one of her ribs. Yet just now walking past this house, the smell of braised pork was so thick you could taste it on the air. I locked eyes with Eleanor again. Where did you get the ration stamps for that, Eleanor? A shocked silence fell over the little group. Miss Talbot's mouth formed a perfect O. Mrs. Pierce's eyes darted between us, sharp with dawning understanding. Eleanor floundered, a fish gasping on a riverbank. I borrowed them. From my cousin in Brookside. It's a loan just until. A loan. I let out a short, humorless laugh. It was a sound I didn't recognize as my own. Every month? For the past 3 years. Her composure shattered. Who told you that? It's a lie. The postman talks, Eleanor. He notices when a widow with no visible income gets 2 registered letters every single month, postmarked from my husband's work town. He wonders. This was a lie. I'd learned the truth much later in my old life, but it struck with the force of truth. I saw the knowledge of her guilt flash in the other women's eyes. They'd seen the letters too. I don't know what you're implying, Clara, she whispered, but the fight was leaving her. The performance was failing before an audience that had stopped believing. I'm not implying. I'm stating a fact. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to an icy murmur meant only for her. For 3 years, Richard has sent you his entire family allowance. Money for my rent, coupons for my food, stamps for my child's clothing. And you've kept every cent, every scrap. You've let us starve while you've dressed in silk and fed your sons bacon. Tears welled in her eyes now, but they were tears of panic, not remorse. He wanted me to manage it. He said it was easier, that you'd be proud he was helping us. He said you were so generous. He lied, I said flatly. Or you are lying now. I don't care which. I don't care what sick fantasy the 2 of you have woven to excuse this. But what belongs to me and my children? Every dollar, every coupon for the last 36 months. You will return. All of it. You can't prove anything, she hissed, a last desperate gambit. I smiled then, a thin, cold stretching of my lips. It felt foreign on my face. I don't need to prove it to a court. I just need to take the story to the supervisors at Richard's bureau. Let them decide if a senior analyst funneling his family's support to his dead brother's wife, leaving his own to near destitution, is appropriate conduct. How do you think his precious career would fare then? The blood left her face entirely. Her career, her son's futures. They were all tied to Richard's standing. She saw the wreckage I could cause. Bring it to me by tonight, I said, turning away. Every last penny. Or tomorrow I start talking to people who can actually do something about it. I walked away, Maya's head nestled against my shoulder. I didn't look back, but I could feel the weight of the neighbors' stunned, sympathetic gazes on my back, and the heat of Eleanor's terrified fury. That evening, after I'd put a sated Maya to bed with a full belly of potato cakes, made from the last of our own stores, I waited. The clock ticked past 9. No Eleanor. So she was betting on my cowardice. On the Clara of old who would swallow the injustice to keep the peace. A grim satisfaction settled in me. She had miscalculated. Just after 10 the front door opened. Not a knock. They just walked in. Richard stood there, travel bag in hand, looking younger than the ghost in my memory, his face etched with a familiar impatience. And beside him, Eleanor, her eyes red-rimmed and triumphant. Clara, she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. Oh, I'm so sorry, I completely forgot to tell you. Richard's train came in early. He's been home for hours. He paused, letting the knife twist. You didn't need to cook, you know. He's already had dinner at my place. Little Henry just wouldn't let his uncle go. I looked from her feigned apology to Richard's face. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but it was quickly buried under a layer of defensive irritation. It's not what you think, Clara, he began, his tone the one he used to explain complicated, tedious things to a child. The boy was clinging to me. It was simpler to stay. I said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and poisonous. Richard sighed, patted Eleanor's shoulder. A gesture of such casual intimacy it stole my breath, and said softly, "It's all right. Claire's not petty. You go on home now, Ellie. Henry will be missing you." Ellie. He hadn't called me a pet name in a decade. Eleanor cast a final, veiled glance my way and slipped out. Richard dropped his bag, the sound loud in the quiet house. "Can we talk?" he asked, not a request but a command. We sat at the scarred kitchen table, the same table where I'd counted pennies and swallowed tears. He was silent for a long time, marshalling his arguments. I waited, my hands folded in my lap, a strange calm over me. He didn't start with an apology. He started with an accusation. "Clara," he said, his voice low and cold. "Did you really go over there and publicly shame Eleanor today? Do you have any idea what you've done to her reputation?" The laugh that escaped me was bitter and sharp. "Her reputation? You've left your wife and child to scrape by on nothing for 3 years while you pampered another woman, and you're worried about her reputation?" His face darkened. "She is not another woman. She is my brother's widow. Your sister-in-law. We have a responsibility." "You have a responsibility," I shot back, my voice like steel. "To me. To Maya. Your debt to your brother is not a mortgage on my life or my daughter's future." He slammed a hand on the table, making the cutlery jump. "He worked himself into an early grave to pay for my education. Where would I be without him? I owe his family everything." I looked at him, this man I had loved, and saw only a stranger animated by a toxic, self-serving guilt. "Then you should have married her," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You should have devoted your whole life to her and left me out of this pathetic martyrdom. But you didn't. You married me. You had children with me. And then you decided we would all pay your penance with our happiness." He stared at me, stunned. The script was wrong. I was not playing my part, the understanding, long-suffering wife. "I thought you were bigger than this, Clara," he finally said, disappointment dripping from every word. "I thought you cared about family. That was the match to the tinderbox." I stood up so fast my chair screeched. "Bigger? I have been small for you for so long I've disappeared. You abandoned us. You sent our survival to her and she spent it on new dresses. And you have the nerve to call me small-minded. Keep your voice down," he hissed, standing as well. "Or what?" I challenged, the full force of my 47 years of future rage burning in my 30-year-old throat. "If you're so confident in your big picture, then I'll be happy to paint it for your superiors tomorrow. Let's see how they view the panorama of you starving your legal family to fatten your brothers." Fear flickered in his eyes, quickly masked by anger. "I just got home. Is this how you welcome me? With threats and hysterics?" "It's not a threat. It's a choice," I said, icy calm descending once more. "You will reimburse me in full for every cent of those 3 years of support. You will do it tomorrow. Or I will meet you at your office and we can discuss family responsibility with the department head." I didn't wait for his reply. I turned, walked to the bedroom, took an extra blanket and pillow, and threw them into the small, cold storage room. Then I locked my bedroom door. The sound of the bolt sliding home was the most satisfying noise I had ever heard. The silence on the other side of the locked door was absolute. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling not with fear, but with the aftermath of a seismic shift. I had drawn a line in the sand of my own soul, and Richard had finally seen it. I heard him eventually, his footsteps heavy, moving into the storage room. There was no knock, no attempt at further conversation. The house settled into a cold, tense truce. Sleep was impossible. The memories of my first life, of the lonely decades that followed his departure with Eleanor, played against the backdrop of my new, terrifying resolve. When the first gray light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I was already dressed and packing the last of mine and Maya's essentials into 2 small satchels. The trunk with our heavier belongings I would arrange to have sent later. After a quiet breakfast of porridge, Maya eyeing me with a child's unerring sense of atmospheric change, I walked to the town's only pharmacy, where I had worked part-time for 3 years, measuring herbs and wrapping prescriptions. It was a humble job, but it had kept a thread of independence alive, and the owner, Mr. Alden, a stern, quiet man with eyes that missed nothing, had been fair. The bell above the door jingled. The familiar scent of dried chamomile, peppermint, and dusty ledgers wrapped around me. Mr. Alden looked up from his counter, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. Mrs. Evans. Early today. Mr. Alden. I approached, my voice steady. I've come to resign. He didn't look surprised. He simply took off his spectacles and began polishing them slowly with a corner of his apron. I see. Found something better. I'm leaving Stone Creek, I said. I've accepted a position with the Western Frontier Development Corps. He stopped polishing. His shrewd eyes studied my face, the resolve there, the shadows beneath. He knew about Richard, about the house next door. Small towns have no secrets, only silent consensus. A long way, he stated. Yes. He was silent for a long moment, then gave a single, slow nod. He reached beneath the counter, pulled out a small cloth-bound ledger and counted out my final wages. Then, to my astonishment, he added a separate crisp red envelope from his own waistcoat pocket. For your travels, Mrs. Evans, he said, his voice gruff. The mountains are high and the river's deep out there. Take care you don't lose your way. The unexpected kindness, the acknowledgement of a journey more than physical, threatened to undo me. My throat tightened. Thank you, Mr. Alden. For everything. Humph, he grunted, but his gaze was not unkind. Just then the door jingled violently. Richard stood there, his coat buttoned wrong, his face a storm cloud. He'd evidently been looking for me. Mr. Alden's eyes flicked from me to him. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. The old man's lips pressed into a thin line, and he turned abruptly to fuss with a jar of licorice root, granting us a semblance of privacy. What were you two talking about? Richard demanded, his voice low and tense. I tucked the money in the red envelope securely into my bag. My departure. I made to move past him, but his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was tight. Claire, wait. I'm sorry. You've suffered. I see that now. I looked at our joined hands, then up at his face. The apology was there, but it was thin, expedient. It was the apology of a man who has been cornered, not one who has seen the light. And I prompted, extracting my hand. He floundered. And, from now on things will be different. I'll make it up to you. Double. How? The word was a dart. By finally taking Eleanor to live with you at your post as you've always planned? Leaving me here to tend the ghosts. He recoiled as if struck. His mouth opened, closed. The guilt that flashed in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. The secret plan, the one I discovered too late in my first life, was already in motion. That's not what he began, but the lie died in his throat. Isn't it? My smile was a winter thing. Tell me, Richard, did you come back this time to fetch her? To finally make your little arrangement official? The color drained from his face. He looked hunted. Clara, for God's sake, lower your voice. It's not like that. She struggled alone with the boys. It's a debt of honor. A debt you are willing to pay with my dignity and our children's security, I finished for him. How noble. How utterly self-serving. His control snapped. What has gotten into you? You speak like a fishwife. This isn't you. You're right, I said calmly, the epicenter of my own earthquake. It isn't the me you created. That woman died. I'm what's left. I walked out of the pharmacy, the bell jingling a farewell behind me. He followed, a step behind, a torrent of whispered justifications and pleas falling on my deaf ears. He produced a wad of cash and a bundle of coupons from his pocket, thrusting them at me. Here. This is what you wanted, isn't it? 3 years back paid. Eleanor was afraid you'd misunderstand, so she gave it to Mother for safekeeping. It was all a terrible miscommunication. I stopped and looked at the money. It was a significant sum. A fortune to the Clara of yesterday. A pittance for the years of loneliness, the lost opportunities, the hungry nights. And the story was a grotesque fabrication, woven in the night between him, Eleanor, and his parents to provide a palatable lie. I took the money. It was mine. But I didn't acknowledge the lie. I simply placed it in my bag, next to Mr. Alden's red envelope. This changes nothing, I said. Clara, please, he begged, genuine desperation entering his voice now. Come home. Let's talk as a family. The children, they need their mother. A fresh, different kind of pain lanced through me. He was right, and he was using it as a weapon. He knew my one vulnerability. Then let's talk as a family, I said, my voice hollow. Let's go to your parents' house. Let's talk where everyone who has had a hand in this can have their say. He hesitated, fear warring with a hope that family pressure might bend me back into shape. Finally he nodded. The Evans family home was a modest but sturdy house that had always felt more like a tribunal than a haven to me. The air inside was thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and quiet judgment. We entered the parlor. The scene was staged, I realized instantly. There sat Eleanor, perched on the edge of the sofa, a lace handkerchief pressed delicately to her dry eyes. My mother-in-law, Agnes, sat stiff-backed in her rocking chair, her lips a razor slash of disapproval. My father-in-law, Walter, stood by the fireplace, his face like thunder. My son, Daniel, now 6, was playing on the rug with Eleanor's youngest, Henry. He didn't run to me. So, Walter began, his voice a low boom that brooked no dissent. We hear you've been making a spectacle of yourself, threatening to ruin your husband's career over kitchen gossip. It's not gossip, I said, my voice clear in the stifling room. It's the fact that for 3 years, your son supported another household while his own went without. Agnes sniffed. Without. You've always been dramatic, Clara. The children were fed, clothed. Eleanor here shared from her own table out of the goodness of her heart. That boy, she pointed a bony finger at Daniel, would be skin and bones without her charity. Charity. The word was a poison. My own husband's wages, filtered through his mistress, were now being called charity bestowed upon me. He's skin and bones because of her, I said, my temper fraying. Because she took what was his. Enough. Walter slammed a fist on the mantelpiece. You will not spew this venom in my house. Richard has worked himself to the bone for all of you. His brother's sacrifice gave him his start, and by God he is honoring it. If you were half the woman Eleanor is, you'd understand duty instead of whining about coupons. The injustice of it, the sheer, staggering revision of history stole my breath. I looked at Richard. He was staring at the floor, silent, complicit in my execution. It was then that Daniel, influenced by the angry voices or Henry's whispering, scrambled to his feet. His small face was twisted in a confusion that mirrored the adult's anger. He ran to me and began beating his little fists against my legs. Bad mama. You made Aunt Ellie cry. Bad. Go away. Each blow was a nail in the coffin of my old life. I stood there, letting him pummel me, my heart freezing into a block of ice. Eleanor let out a soft, theatrical sob into her handkerchief. Richard finally moved, pulling Daniel away. Clara, please, he whispered, his voice strained. Look what you're doing. Apologize to Eleanor. Let's end this madness. I looked around the room, at the contempt in Walter's eyes, the cold satisfaction in Agnes's, the performative grief in Eleanor's, the bewildered betrayal in my son's, and the weak desperation in my husband's. And I started to laugh. It was a low, hollow, terrible sound that silenced the room. It held no joy, only the absolute zero of final understanding. You're all so disgustingly perfect for each other, I said, the laughter dying into a smile that felt like a crack in glass. The noble son, honoring his brother by coveting his wife. The doting parents, so proud of his duty. The gracious widow, living in luxury on another woman's life. My eyes found Daniel. And you, my son, you love her so much? Then let her be your mother. I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't run. I walked with a steady, final pace through the gate and into the lane. A group of neighbor women, including Mrs. Gable and Miss Talbot, were clustered by a fence. They saw my face, the suitcase in my hand. They saw the truth, my posture screamed. Claire, love, where are you going? Mrs. Gable asked, her face etched with worry. The dam broke. Tears I had not shed in the house of my enemies spilled over. The story tumbled out. The forgotten birthday, the 3 years of hidden support, the dinner I wasn't told about, the plan to take Eleanor away. Their faces shifted from curiosity to shock, then to molten outrage. They clicked their tongues, cursed under their breaths, reached out to touch my arm. The nerve. All that meat and your little one with porridge. We wondered. Their belief was a bomb and a catalyst. It solidified my reality. I'm leaving, I said, my voice trembling but clear. They can have each other. Without me in the way. Amidst their protests about my children, about enduring, I just shook my head. I clutched my suitcase, covered my mouth to stifle the sobs that were both grief and liberation, and walked down the dusty lane toward the train station. I did not look back. The woman known as Clara Evans, the yielding wife, was gone. Someone else was walking away toward a western horizon, and she would never, ever yield again. The train west was a beast of iron and steam, a roaring, rattling conduit into a different world. Maya, wide-eyed and solemn, pressed her face to the grimy window, watching the familiar gentle hills of our home state flatten and then erupt into vast golden plains. With every mile, the knot of grief and fear in my chest loosened, replaced by a nervous, expanding sense of space, both around me and within me. Dr. Alistair Finch met our contingent at the final railhead, a dusty outpost where the world seemed to end. He was a tall, spare man with a wind-burned face and eyes that held the sharp, assessing look of a cartographer. His gaze swept over our group of 12, men and women, young idealists and older, seasoned hands like myself. "Miss Clark," he said, finding me in the crowd. He'd insisted on using my maiden name from the first correspondence. It felt like a gift, a separate identity waiting to be reclaimed. "And this is Maya. Welcome." He shook my hand, his grip firm and dry, then offered a formal little bow to my daughter. No pity, no condescension. It was the first equal treatment I'd received in a decade. The final leg was by battered lorries and then wagons, following dirt tracks that were little more than suggestions across the land. We arrived at the camp as the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple behind the jagged silhouettes of mountains. It was a collection of log cabins, tents, and a larger central hall, clinging to the side of a vast valley. The air was thin, crisp, and scented with pine and cold earth. This was not a gentle place. It was stark, demanding, breathtaking. It asked a question of everyone who entered. Are you strong enough? For the first time I felt I might have an answer. My assignment was twofold: to assist in the camp's rudimentary school and to work as a translator and scribe for Dr. Finch's team, which was surveying the region and documenting indigenous plant life and geology. My days fell into a rhythm wholly alien and deeply satisfying. Mornings were spent in the drafty schoolhouse, its potbelly stove fighting a constant battle against the mountain chill. I taught the dozen children of the camp, teamsters' kids, trappers' sons, a few quiet children from a nearby native settlement who came to learn. Maya sat among them, her initial shyness melting as she sounded out letters alongside a boy named Eli whose father was a geologist. I taught reading, basic sums, and the geography of this fierce new world. There was no talk of yielding here. The lessons were about adaptation, resilience, observation. Afternoons I worked with Dr. Finch. He was a man of few words but immense patience. He taught me to transcribe his field notes in a precise, clear hand, to categorize pressed plant specimens, to map survey coordinates onto clean parchment. He spoke to me of soil composition, watersheds, and migratory patterns as if I were a colleague, not a secretary. The work engaged a part of my mind I thought had atrophied, the part that questioned, analyzed, learned. "You have a linguist's ear, Miss Clark," he remarked one day as I puzzled out the phonetic spelling of a local place name from a trapper's report. "Precision in language is precision in thought. Never lose that." The words were a kind of sustenance. My body grew lean and strong from the hard work, the simple food, the clean, brutal air. My spirit, so long cramped in the dark cupboard of Richard's neglect, stretched out into this vastness. News from Stone Creek came in trickles, carried by the infrequent mail wagon. A letter from a cautiously sympathetic Mrs. Gable confirmed the fallout. Richard, facing the scandal I'd promised, had not been dismissed, but his coveted relocation had been denied. He'd been transferred to a mediocre desk job in a regional office, a career dead end. The grand plan of whisking Eleanor away had evaporated. Eleanor, Mrs. Gable wrote with barely concealed satisfaction, had been taken back in by her family in some disgrace, and had hastily married a widower farmer from a neighboring county. a match rumored to be far from comfortable. I felt no triumph, only a cold, quiet verification. The universe had meted out a rough justice. I sent money orders back every month, half of my modest stipend, addressed to a trusted neighbor with strict instructions. Use it to buy meat, fruit, good cloth for Daniel and Maya. I would not let my children want even from a distance. I wrote simple letters to them describing the towering pines, the darting coyotes, the endless sky. I did not speak of their father. 3 years passed in this way. The frontier camp evolved into a more settled outpost. The first group of Corps members, their tenure completed, prepared to return east, their experience a golden ticket to academic posts and government positions. Dr. Finch himself was recalled to the capital for a new assignment. He called me into his study the day before his departure. The room was packed with crates of specimens and books. "My tenure here is concluded, Miss Clark," he said, not looking up from a map he was carefully rolling. "The Corps will have a new director. You are, of course, welcome to stay on in your current capacities." I felt a pang. He had been my anchor, my first true mentor. He finally looked up, his keen eyes meeting mine. "However, I have been asked to recommend personnel for a new project. Classified. National importance. It requires a mind for detail, absolute discretion, and a certain fortitude of character. The work is isolated. The hours long. The subject matter is sensitive." He paused. "It is not work for everyone. But I think it might be for you." My heart hammered against my ribs. A classified project. National importance. It was a door swinging open onto a path I could never have imagined from my kitchen in Stone Creek. "Where?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A research facility. In the desert. You would be a documentation and logistics analyst. Your linguistic precision would be an asset." He named a place I'd only seen on maps. "You would not be able to speak of your work. Visits home would be rare, brief, and monitored." Home. The word had no geography anymore. Home was the space I had carved for myself and Maya, wherever that was. "Why, I asked. "There is a good school at the facility. For children of staff. She would be cared for." I thought of the future I had escaped. The narrow, resentful life, the bitter death. I thought of the woman I was becoming here, among the pines and the pure silence. This was a chance to become something more, to contribute to something vast and unknown. To matter in a way that had nothing to do with being a wife or a martyr. "Yes," I said, the word leaving my lips with the force of a vow. "I would be honored." The desert facility was another world entirely. It was a geometrically precise cluster of low sand-colored buildings humming with a quiet, focused energy, set against an expanse of burning blue sky and red rock. The work was indeed consuming. I was a small cog in a vast, secret machine, tracking procurement, ciphering communications, maintaining the flawless records upon which grand, terrifying calculations were made. I learned about propulsion, metallurgy, celestial mechanics. I spoke to physicists and engineers, and they spoke back, respecting the clarity of my reports. Maya thrived in the orderly, intellectually charged environment. She grew tall and strong, her mind sharp, her world unconstrained by the petty dramas of Stone Creek. She called me mother, with a respect that had been absent in her childhood whines. We had a small, neat apartment. Our life was one of routine, purpose, and a profound shared understanding of the privilege of our escape. 15 years folded into the desert silence. I rose through the civilian ranks to a position of significant responsibility. The project became my life. And then one still, breathless dawn, I stood with hundreds of others on a remote concrete apron, special goggles over my eyes, as the countdown echoed from loudspeakers. The machine we had all poured our lives into sat on the launch pad, a needle of polished metal aimed at the heavens. My throat was tight. I thought of the thousands of pages I had transcribed, the millions of numbers I had verified, the silent, unseen lattice of work that had led to this moment. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The world dissolved in sound and light. A sun bloomed at the base of the tower, and the rocket, our rocket, rose on a pillar of fire and thunder. It tore through the veil of morning cloud, our ascendant star, leaving a scar of glory across the sky. The cheers around me were a wave I rode, tears streaming down my face unchecked. In that cataclysmic moment of triumph, every missed birthday, every hungry night, every ounce of scorn from Walter and Agnes, every betrayal by Richard and Eleanor, It was all burned away in that purifying flame. I had helped build a star. What were they compared to that? The project entered a new phase. We were granted leave. A month of rest after 15 years of tension. As the train carried us east, back toward a past that now felt like a story about another person, Maya, now a poised young woman of 19, turned to me. "Will we see father?" she asked, her voice neutral. I looked out at the rolling hills, so tame after the desert and the mountains. "If you wish to," I said. "But I am going back to settle an old account. It is long overdue." The woman looking back at me from the train window was gray at the temples, her face lined not with bitterness, but with thought and wind and sun. She wore a stylish, simple suit of dove-gray wool. She looked capable. She looked free. Clara Evans was gone. Clara Clark was coming home. Stone Creek hadn't changed. That was the first shock. The same dusty Main Street, the same faded awning over the pharmacy, the same ancient oak tree shading the town square. It felt smaller, like a diorama I had outgrown. I stood on the platform, a leather suitcase at my feet, and breathed air that was soft and humid, laden with the scent of cut grass and nostalgia, not pine and desiccated rock. Maya stood beside me, a young woman in a smart traveling suit, her posture straight, her eyes taking in the scene with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist. She carried her own small case, the contents of which were a mystery to me, books perhaps or sketches. Our years in the desert facility had granted her a quiet confidence I admired. We hadn't announced our arrival. I wanted no fanfare, no rehearsed greetings. As we walked the familiar lanes toward my old neighborhood, the second shock arrived. I was recognized. "Lord above. Is that Clara Evans?" Clara. It was old Miss Talbot, now truly ancient, hunched over a cane on her porch. Her voice, though raspy, carried the same piercing quality. A head popped over a fence. Mrs. Gable, her hair fully white but her eyes as sharp as ever. "Clara? Oh, my dear girl. Is it really you?" Within minutes, a small cluster of women from the old days had surrounded us, their faces a mosaic of astonishment and delight. They clutched at my hands, their eyes drinking in my tailored clothes, my bearing the unmistakable mark of a life lived elsewhere. "Where have you been, child?" Mrs. Gable demanded, not unkindly. "We got your money orders regular as clockwork, but not a word. We thought you'd vanished into the Wild West." "I've been working," I said simply, offering a smile that felt genuine. "For the government. Research." The old habit of discretion forged in the desert made me vague. "You look wonderful," Miss Talbot breathed, her eyes shrewd. "Prosperous. Maya. You're a picture." Maya accepted the compliments with a gracious nod. I could feel their gazes cataloging the quality of our wool coats, the good leather of our shoes. I had dressed carefully for this, not out of vanity but as a statement. The ghost of the shabby, apologetic woman they remembered had been exorcised. "And you're back to stay?" Mrs. Pierce asked, hope in her voice. "Just visiting," I said, and saw the flicker of understanding in their eyes. They knew why I was here. It was then I saw him. He stood at the gate of the house I had once called home, a bag of groceries dangling from one hand. Richard. Time had not been kind in the way it had been to me. He was thin, almost gaunt, his shoulders stooped under a worn jacket. His hair, what was left of it, was fully gray. He looked every one of his 50-odd years and more. He was staring at us, or rather at me, with an expression of such profound, stunned disbelief that he seemed frozen to the spot. The chatter of the women died away. A palpable tension filled the lane. I gave my neighbors a final warm squeeze of the hand. "It was so good to see you all. I'll call round properly before I go." I turned and walked toward the gate, Maya a steady presence at my side. Richard didn't move until we were a few feet away. Then he blinked as if waking from a dream, and the bag of groceries slipped from his grasp, scattering potatoes and a tin of coffee in the dust. "Clara." His voice was a dry rustle. "Hello, Richard." He couldn't seem to form another word. His eyes roamed over my face, my clothes, then landed on Maya. A complex storm of emotions passed over his features. Shame, longing, a terrible, weary regret. "Maya," he whispered. "Father," she replied, her tone polite, neutral. The distance in that single word was a canyon. You're here." It was a statement of the impossible. "We're here," I confirmed. He scrambled to pick up the spilled groceries, his movements flustered. Come in, please come in. Oh, I'll make tea. The house was clean but shabby, filled with a silence that felt heavy and permanent. The furniture was the same but worn thin. There were no pictures on the walls, no signs of a woman's touch. It was the house of a man waiting, not living. He bustled in the kitchen, the familiar clatter of cups and nervous rhythm. I sat in the parlor, on the very sofa where Eleanor had staged her tears. Maya sat beside me, her hand finding mine and giving it a brief, firm squeeze. Richard returned with a tea tray, his hands trembling slightly. He poured, the silence screaming. You look well, he finally managed, unable to meet my eyes. I am. Maya, you've grown so tall. So beautiful. His voice cracked. Thank you, she said. Another endless silence. I took a sip of tea. It was weak, badly brewed. I heard about your parents, I said quietly. I'm sorry for your loss. Mrs. Gable's letters had detailed Agnes's passing 5 years ago, and Walter's just last year. He nodded, staring into his cup. Thank you. It was quiet. At the end. He took a shuddering breath. They asked for you. Near the end. Mother said. She said she was sorry. I felt nothing. The apology had come 2 decades too late from the wrong person. It was an epitaph, not an absolution. Where's Daniel? I asked. A shadow crossed his face. He's in the city. He works for a printing firm. He's married. A nice girl. The words were rote, devoid of paternal pride. He comes at holidays. He looked up finally, his eyes desperate. He knows he owes his education, his start to you. The money you sent. I waved a hand, cutting him off. I hadn't come for gratitude. And Eleanor? His face closed off completely. She remarried. Not long after you left. It wasn't a good match. I hear things are difficult. He said it quickly, wanting to dismiss the subject. Her name was a poison in this house now, the cause of all his ruin. The great love affair, it seemed, had not been enough to build a life on, once the scaffolding of my sacrifice was removed. He leaned forward suddenly, his eyes burning with a fervent, misplaced hope. You're back now. You'll stay? The house, it's yours of course. Always was. We could be a family again. A proper family. The sheer, staggering audacity of it left me breathless for a moment. After everything, he still saw me as a component to be slotted back into the empty space in his broken life. No, Richard, I said, my voice gentle but absolute. I'm not staying. The hope died, replaced by a crushing defeat. He sagged back into his chair, an old man. I came to see the children. And, I paused, steadying myself for the final, necessary cut. I came to settle things legally between us. I'd like a divorce. He flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, to beg, but then he looked at me, really looked, and saw the unshakable truth. The woman before him was not the woman he had married. She was someone who had launched rockets into the sky. She could not be persuaded by guilt or bound by duty. All the fight left him in a long, defeated sigh. He simply nodded. If that's what you want. It is. Will you at least stay tonight? For old time's sake. It was a plea, but a feeble one. I thought of the cold storage room, the locked door. I thought of the vast, silent desert and the stars you could almost touch. We have a room at the inn, I said. But we'll have dinner. As a family. For the children's sake. The dinner was a strained, surreal affair. Richard, animated by a frantic, pathetic energy, cooked a surprisingly decent meal. Daniel arrived, summoned by a terse message. He was a man now, softer around the middle than his father, with a cautious, watchful demeanor. His greeting to me was polite, respectful, but cool. The boy who had called me a bad mama was still in there, shaped by his grandparents' narratives and his own choice to align with the winning side, which in the end had not been his father's. But with Maya, he thought. They talked of the city, of his work. She spoke carefully of her schooling, of the research campus where she'd grown up. I saw him watching her with a mixture of awe and resentment. She was everything he might have been had the winds blown differently. After dinner, as Richard washed dishes with a heartbreaking meticulousness, I stood with Daniel in the parlor. You sent the money, he said abruptly, not looking at me. All those years. It helped. With grandfather's medicine. With things. I'm glad. He shuffled his feet. He waited for you, you know. He never moved on. Not really. Everyone said you were never coming back, that you had a new life, a new someone. But he just waited. I said nothing. Richard's lonely vigil was not my redemption, nor my burden. It was the consequence he had chosen. This divorce, Daniel ventured. It's what you really want. It's what is necessary, I replied. He finally met my eyes, and in his I saw not a son's love, but a man's weary acknowledgement of a complicated truth. Then I hope it makes you happy. It was the closest to a blessing I would get. The next morning at the county clerk's office, the process was swift and antiseptic. The clerk, a young man who clearly had no idea of the history contained in the papers before him, stamped the documents with a dull thud. Dissolution of marriage. Richard signed his name with a hand that shook. I signed mine with the same steady hand that had recorded data for a rocket's flight. Outside, on the courthouse steps, he looked old and hollow in the morning sun. Clara, he swallowed. I am sorry. For all of it. This time the apology was stripped bare. No excuses, no justifications. Just the raw, ugly fact of regret. I looked at this man, the architect of my first life's ruin and the inadvertent catalyst for my second. The hatred was gone, burned away long ago. All that remained was a vast, quiet pity. I know, I said. And I did. Changed nothing, but I acknowledged it. I picked up my suitcase. Maya was already at the curb, having hailed a motor cab to take us back to the station. Goodbye, Richard. He didn't say goodbye. He just stood there, a solitary figure growing smaller in the cab's rear window, as we drove away from the ruins of the past, toward a future that was, for the first time, entirely and unquestionably my own. The desert facility had been my cocoon, but retirement was a gentle, sun-drenched emergence. The state, in gratitude for our years of silent service, offered residents of our project a place in a quiet, well-appointed retirement community nestled in the rolling hills north of the capital. It was a world of gardens, libraries, and peace. My apartment had a wide balcony that looked out over a man-made lake, and for the first time in my life my time was completely my own. I planted roses. I joined a book club with other sharp-eyed, retired librarians and engineers. I learned to paint, badly but with great joy, capturing the stark beauty of the desert from memory. I traveled, finally seeing the mountains and rivers of my own country not as obstacles or survey lines, but as art. My children, Daniel and Maya, were constants in this new landscape. Daniel, mellowed by fatherhood and the quiet success of his own small business, visited with his wife and two boisterous boys. Maya, now a biologist working for a conservation trust, came with stories of forests and watersheds that reminded me fondly of Dr. Finch. They came often, sometimes too often, filling my tidy space with noise and laughter and the sweet, sticky hugs of grandchildren. There was a distance, of course. A canyon carved by the first 15 years of their lives. We were careful and polite with each other, a mother and children learning a new dialect of love. They were grateful, I think, for the financial security I had provided, the university degrees I'd funded, the down payments on their homes. But the gratitude was tinged with a lingering, unspoken accusation. You left. You built a star, but you left us behind. I accepted this. It was the price of my freedom, and I had long ago decided it was worth paying. On my 75th birthday they all came, Daniel, Maya, their families. They filled my apartment with a riotous party, a two-tiered cake covered in buttercream roses. My grandson Leo sat on my lap, leading the room in an off-key but enthusiastic rendition of Happy Birthday. The room swam with love, manufactured perhaps, but warm. In the middle of the chorus I saw Daniel's phone light up on the table. He glanced at it and his face changed. The smile didn't vanish, but it solidified into a mask. He excused himself and stepped onto the balcony. I felt a cold trickle of premonition. When he returned, his eyes avoided mine. Everything all right? I asked, keeping my voice light over the singing. Fine, Mom. Nothing. He forced a broader smile. Make a wish. I closed my eyes, the cheers of my family in my ears. I didn't wish for health or happiness. I wished for the strength to hold on to the peace I had forged. When I blew out the candles, the smoke carried the wish away. It wasn't until 2 days later, when the last of the leftover cake had been wrapped and the grandchildren's lost toys reclaimed, that Maya came to see me. Her face was somber. It was father, she said without preamble. The call during the party. He had a massive cerebral hemorrhage. They took him to the hospital in Stone Creek. I felt nothing. It was as if she told me a historical figure had died. Is he gone? She nodded. Daniel went that night after the party. But it was too late. He passed before midnight. I thought of the gaunt, defeated man on the courthouse steps, a lifetime ago. I see. The hospital bills. He didn't have much saved. His pension was small. Daniel and I had to cover the shortfall. And the funeral costs. She said it not as a complaint but as a simple report. A logistical problem they had solved. A simple service, I said, not as a suggestion but a prediction. Yes. He was buried yesterday in the Stone Creek Cemetery. Next to his parents. He paused, watching me. Daniel asked if you wanted to go. To pay your respects. I looked out at the lake where a pair of swans cut a silent V through the still water. Richard Evans had ceased to be a living person to me the day I walked out of his parents' house. The man who died in the hospital was just the empty shell that had carried that memory. My grief, all of it, had been spent in my first life on the floor of Eleanor's dining room. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. My respects were paid a long time ago. Maya simply nodded. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the man who was my husband had died for me decades before his body failed. A week later Daniel came. He looked tired, the weight of practical death, the paperwork, the bills, the sorting of a meager estate, heavy on his shoulders. In his hands he held a sealed, yellowed envelope. He left almost nothing, Daniel said, his voice rough. Some books. His old watch. This was in his desk drawer. It had your name on it. He placed the envelope on my coffee table. On the front, in Richard's once precise, now shakier script, it read, "For Clara." He must have written it a while ago, Daniel mused. The nurse said he'd been sorting old papers last month. After Daniel left, I sat for a long time, the envelope lying between me and the serene view of the lake. I didn't touch it. I imagined what it might contain. An apology more detailed, more desperate. A justification, a final attempt to make me understand his twisted sense of honor. A declaration of a love he'd never been capable of showing. Perhaps just a rambling, lonely old man's final thoughts. For a moment, curiosity flickered. The historian in me, the documentarian, wanted to see the final piece of evidence, to close the file with complete data. But the woman, Clara Clark, had no need for it. The apologies were too late. The justifications were meaningless. The love, if it was ever there, had been too poisoned to matter. Whatever words were in that envelope belonged to a ghost, and I had stopped listening to ghosts long ago. I picked up the envelope. It was light. Probably just a page or two. I held it over the small wastebasket by my desk. Life, I had learned, is astonishingly short. A century if you are lucky, and most of it is spent in a struggle. Against want, against expectation, against the slow creep of time. We grasp so little. We lose so much. The ledger of any life shows more in the column of sorrow and regret than in the column of joy. But we choose what we carry with us. We choose which debts to pay, which wounds to nurse, which letters to open. I opened my fingers. The envelope fluttered, turning over once, and landed softly atop the discarded drafts of a bad watercolor and yesterday's newspaper. A final, silent yielding, not mine but the past's, to the bin. I turned back to the balcony, to the sun warming the tiles, to the book waiting open on the table. To the vast, quiet, hard-won piece of my own making. The story was over. The rest was just living. The end.